I say this is the greatest day of my life, does it spoil everything?
We often think of the Empire's fall as a matter of X-Wings and superweapons. But at its core, it was a failure of personnel. It was Syril Karn's obsessive zealotry on Molana 1 that first radicalised Cassian Andor, turning a petty thief into a focused insurgent. On the other side, it was Dedra Meero's own scavenger mentality, a habit driven by high competence and a deep distrust of her peers that eventually removed her, the ISB's most effective anti-rebellion asset, from the equation. By looking at these two, we aren't just looking at officers. We're looking at the specific spark that set the administrative forest on fire. The Meritocratic displacement. The story of Syril Karn and Dedra Meero isn't just about two villains. It's a structural audit of what happens when a corrupt system begins to cannibalise its own most loyal people. We're looking at a transition in the Empire from a meritocracy to a machine built on cynical careerism and paranoia. By tracing their path from the Bureau of Standards to the streets of Ferrix, we can see the specific psychological variables that led to their eventual isolation. This isn't just a story of bad judgment. It's the inevitable result of an autoimmune crisis within the Imperial apparatus itself.
I'm sure that in several days, with the proper resources, I can bring this case to a...
Stop!
The tragedy of the perfect cell. This story centres on a fundamental irony. In a corrupt system, integrity is actually a defect. Syril and Dedra are essentially the only healthy cells in the Imperial body. They're the only ones who truly care about the data, the protocol, and the end result. But because the Empire has transitioned from a meritocracy into a machine run by cynical careerists, it treats these high-fidelity individuals as threats. Syril's journey starts with a blind commitment to a protocol that his own peers have already abandoned. His early failures on Molana 1 and Ferrix weren't just bad luck. They were the result of a massive gap between his uniformed authority and his actual experience. He treated leadership like a trait you inherit just by putting on a suit, expecting a lazy security force to mirror his own idealised standards. The system's autoimmune response was to monitor and suppress him, eventually liquidating the very zealot who was trying to save it.
Take solace in this. You will not be replaced.
The Meero variable and the outsider's armour. While Syril is failing upward, Dedra Meero is trying to survive the ISB. She is the optimal bureaucratic unit, but her entire methodology is fueled by insecurity. As a woman in a hyper-masculine cutthroat hierarchy, she uses pedantry and coldness as a survival mechanism. When she first encounters Syril, she doesn't see a peer. She sees a mirror reflecting her own vulnerabilities. His sincere obsession with the rules scares her because it reminds her of how tenuous her own status is. She treats him with defensive autocracy, using sarcasm to reinforce a distance she's terrified of losing.
An Imperial Star Path unit was stolen from the Steerguard Naval Yard and found at the scene. That gives me jurisdictional access.
You've been here, what, just over a year?
The Ferrix catalyst and the collapse of the persona. The turning point for this dyad happens during the insurrection on Ferrix. This is the moment where Dedra's autocratic armour is physically dismantled by a riot she couldn't control. When Syril pulls her into that closet, he provides a sanctuary of sincerity at the exact moment her professional identity collapses. Through this proximity to death, Dedra is forced to recognise Cyril's worth, not as a co-worker, but as a biological anchor. For the first time, she sees a human signal in a system that has otherwise pivoted entirely to noise.
I should say thank you. You don't have to.
The ironic sympathizer and the fleeting victory. We see a strange psychological inversion. Syril eventually achieves his goal. He captures Cassian Andor. It's the ultimate validation of his competence. However, his victory is tragically short-lived. Just as he proves his martial worth, he is killed by the leader of the very rebel cell that he was commanded to infiltrate. He dies a martyr for an empire that had already abandoned him, proving that the system values the process of control far more than the accuracy of the audit.
What are we doing here?
Following orders.
Post-mortem and the suicide of the persona. Syril's death represents the final liquidation of Dedra Meero's connection to reality. Without him to act as her validation loop, she regresses into a deeper, more isolated shell. This isolation dictates her final tactical failure. Since she no longer has a subsurface proxy like Syril to do her dirty work, she is forced to confront Luthen Rail, or Axis, personally. It is a suicide of the persona. She fails to realise that without a human anchor, she isn't a leader. She's just another node in a failing system that is already programmed for a total crash.
You're finished.
You're too late.
Conclusion. The terminal logic of the Empire. Ultimately, the tragedy here isn't a failure of talent. It's a triumph of institutional entropy. By treating loyalty as a threat and initiative as a target, the Empire engineered its own blindness. Syril and Dedra were the last high-fidelity signals in a regime built on the logistics of fear. This theme carries all the way through to the Skywalker saga itself, from the Bureau of Standards to the death of the Emperor. No matter how much the system warped someone like Anakin Skywalker, it was that very distortion that eventually caused him to fatally rebel against Palpatine. The rebellion didn't have to dismantle the Empire's administration. The administration had already engineered itself to fail.